What if I told you that everything you've been taught about suppressing your dark impulses, avoiding negative emotions, and maintaining perfect moral composure is actually destroying your psychological wholeness and keeping you trapped in a state of perpetual inner conflict? The conventional wisdom that darkness must be eliminated, that shadow aspects of personality should be denied, and that spiritual growth means transcending all negative traits has created more psychological damage than perhaps any other misunderstanding in human history. You see, what the masses fail to comprehend is that these dark archetypes, the destroyer, the trickster, the tyrant, the sage, the wild one, they are not malevolent forces to be banished. They are essential components of the complete human psyche, containing tremendous creative and transformative power that, when properly integrated, can elevate your consciousness to levels most people never dream possible. The tragedy is that by rejecting these aspects of yourself, you're not becoming more enlightened, you're becoming more fractured, more neurotic, and more susceptible to the very destructive behaviors you're trying to avoid. But here's what's particularly insidious about this mass delusion. The harder you push against these archetypal energies, the more they push back from your unconscious mind, manifesting as compulsions, addictions, explosive outbursts, and self-sabotaging behaviors that seem to come from nowhere. The person who insists they never feel anger becomes the one who has sudden, inexplicable rage episodes. The individual who claims to be beyond sexual desire becomes obsessed with control and dominance in other areas. The one who denies their capacity for destruction becomes mysteriously drawn to situations that create chaos in their life. This is the shadow's revenge, and it will continue until you learn to consciously engage with these powerful archetypal forces rather than pretending they don't exist within you. Most people don't realize they're walking around carrying these immense reservoirs of untapped psychological energy, completely unconscious of the fact that their attempts at spiritual bypassing and emotional perfectionism are actually making them weaker, not stronger. They live in a constant state of internal warfare, using tremendous amounts of energy to suppress natural impulses, while wondering why they feel exhausted, unfulfilled, and somehow fake or inauthentic. The first symptom of this archetypal denial is what I call projection overflow. You begin seeing the dark qualities you refuse to acknowledge in yourself everywhere else. The person who cannot admit their own capacity for cruelty becomes obsessed with pointing out cruelty in others. The individual who denies their own manipulative tendencies becomes paranoid about being manipulated. The one who cannot face their own destructive impulses becomes hyper-vigilant about destruction in their environment. The second manifestation is compensatory extremism. Because you're not consciously integrating these energies, they emerge in distorted compulsive ways. The person who tries to be perfectly good becomes secretly addicted to gossip or judgment. The individual attempting complete emotional control develops obsessive compulsive behaviors or eating disorders. The one pursuing absolute positivity experiences overwhelming anxiety or depression that seems to come from nowhere. The third symptom is creative stagnation, since these dark archetypes contain enormous creative power. Rejecting them blocks your access to your most innovative and transformative capabilities. You find yourself stuck in safe, predictable patterns, unable to break through to new levels of achievement or expression. Your art becomes sanitized, your business ventures become conventional, your relationships become polite but passionless. The fourth manifestation is authenticity erosion. By constantly monitoring and censoring aspects of your natural psychological makeup, you lose touch with your genuine responses and instincts. You become a carefully constructed persona rather than a whole human being, and others can sense this artificiality even when they can't articulate what feels off about your presence. The hidden costs of these archetypal fragmentation compound exponentially over time. Your immune system weakens because psychological wholeness and physical health are intimately connected. Your decision-making becomes impaired because you're cutting yourself off from crucial information that these darker aspects provide about situations and people. Your capacity for deep intimacy diminishes because genuine connection requires showing all of yourself, not just the socially acceptable parts. Perhaps most tragically, you lose access to the fierce protective instincts and boundary-setting capabilities that these dark archetypes provide. Without conscious connection to your inner destroyer, you cannot effectively eliminate toxic situations from your life. Without access to your inner trickster, you cannot navigate complex social and professional dynamics with agility. Without relationship with your inner tyrant, you cannot command respect or lead effectively when circumstances demand it. Why do conventional solutions fail so spectacularly? Because they're based on the fundamental misconception that psychological health means eliminating aspects of yourself rather than integrating them. Traditional self-help approaches, mainstream spiritual teachings, and even much of conventional psychology operate from the premise that the goal is to become a sanitized version of human consciousness, calm, positive, agreeable, and predictable. But this approach is like trying to create a magnificent symphony by removing all the minor keys, dissonant notes, and dynamic contrasts. What you end up with isn't beautiful music. It's bland, forgettable noise that lacks the emotional depth and complexity that make music truly moving. The same principle applies to human consciousness. Without the full spectrum of archetypal energies, you don't become more evolved. You become more boring, predictable, and ultimately less capable of handling life's complexities. Here's what I can promise you with absolute certainty. There are 5 specific methods for safely invoking and integrating these dark archetypal energies that will fundamentally transform how you experience power, creativity, and authentic self-expression. These aren't theoretical concepts or spiritual platitudes. They're practical psychological technologies that I've observed working consistently across cultures, time periods, and personality types. The scientific backing for this approach comes from decades of research in depth psychology, neuroscience, and anthropological studies of successful individuals throughout history. What we find consistently is that those who achieve the highest levels of creative output, leadership effectiveness, and psychological resilience are invariably those who have learned to consciously work with the complete archetypal spectrum rather than rejecting portions of it. Brain imaging studies show that individuals who practice conscious shadow integration display greater neural connectivity between different brain regions, enhanced emotional regulation capabilities, and increased access to both analytical and creative problem-solving networks simultaneously. This neurological integration translates directly into enhanced performance across virtually every domain of human activity. Consider the contrast between two types of people: those who desperately try to maintain perfect personas versus those who have learned to consciously engage engage with their full archetypal range. The first group exhibits constant stress responses, depleted energy levels, and rigid behavioral patterns that make them vulnerable to sudden breakdowns when life presents unexpected challenges. The second group demonstrates remarkable resilience, creative adaptability, and the kind of magnetic presence that naturally draws opportunities and relationships to them. The transformation I'm describing isn't just about feeling better about yourself, though that certainly happens. It's about gaining access to psychological resources that most people never even know exist within them. When you complete this integration process, you'll never approach conflict, creativity, or leadership the same way again. You'll possess a level of self-knowledge and authentic power that allows you to navigate complex situations with confidence and effectiveness that seems almost supernatural to those still trapped in archetypal fragmentation. This journey requires moving beyond the comfortable illusions of spiritual bypassing into the fertile darkness where real psychological gold is hidden. Are you ready to discover capabilities within yourself that you've been taught to fear? The foundational principle underlying successful dark archetype integration is what I call conscious shadowing. But here's what most people miss about this process. They believe that acknowledging dark impulses means acting on them destructively, when the truth is that consciousness transforms the energy completely. Think of it like electricity. The same electrical current that can kill you if encountered unconsciously becomes incredibly useful when channeled through proper wiring and outlets. Let me give you 3 different ways to understand this transformation. First, consider how a master chef works with fire. Fire can burn down the kitchen or create the most exquisite cuisine. The difference lies entirely in conscious application and proper technique. The chef doesn't fear fire or try to eliminate it. They develop such intimate familiarity with its properties that they can use it to create results impossible through any other means. Your dark archetypes work exactly the same way. Second, think about how a skilled musician uses dissonance in composition. The notes that sound harsh and unpleasant when played randomly become sources of profound emotional impact when integrated consciously into a larger harmonic structure. The musician doesn't avoid these challenging notes. They learn to resolve them in ways that create beauty impossible without their presence. Your challenging psychological energies function identically. Third, observe how a master martial artist approaches potentially dangerous techniques. They don't practice moves that could cause serious harm by pretending those moves are gentle and safe. Instead, they develop such precise control and deep understanding of the techniques that they can apply exactly the right amount of force in exactly the right way to achieve their intended result without causing unnecessary damage. This is precisely how you must approach your own psychological power centers. The neuroscience behind this transformation is fascinating and crucial to understand. When you consciously engage with archetypal energies through proper techniques, you activate what researchers call prefrontal integration networks, brain regions that allow you to experience intense emotions and impulses while simultaneously maintaining executive control and strategic thinking. This creates a state of what we might call conscious wildness, full access to your primal energies combined with sophisticated discernment about how to direct them. But here's where most people sabotage themselves. They try to integrate their shadow by thinking about it, analyzing it, or talking about it endlessly without ever actually feeling and working with the raw energy itself. This is like trying to learn to swim by reading books about water. The intellectual understanding is useful, but it cannot substitute for direct experiential engagement with the forces you're attempting to integrate. Consider what happens when these energies remain unconscious and unintegrated. The person who refuses to acknowledge their capacity for manipulation becomes vulnerable to being manipulated by others who are more conscious of these dynamics. The individual who cannot accept their aggressive instincts becomes unable to protect themselves or their loved ones when situations require fierce boundary setting. The one who denies their capacity for calculated selfishness gets taken advantage of repeatedly while wondering why they can't seem to get their needs met in relationships. Think about a time when you felt most authentically powerful, not fake confidence or desperate control, but genuine, unshakable personal authority. I guarantee that in that moment, you were unconsciously accessing some of these darker archetypal energies in a beneficial way. Perhaps you were standing up to someone who was treating you unfairly, or making a decision that others thought was too risky, or expressing a truth that made people uncomfortable but needed to be said. That feeling of authentic power is what becomes available consistently when you learn to consciously work with your complete psychological spectrum. The reason most therapeutic and spiritual approaches fail to produce lasting transformation is that they attempt to heal psychological fragmentation through more fragmentation, encouraging you to identify with only the good parts of yourself while continuing to reject the bad parts. This creates an internal civil war that drains your energy and prevents genuine integration from occurring. Conventional wisdom teaches you to approach these energies with fear, shame, and suppression, but these emotions actually strengthen the shadow's unconscious influence over your behavior. Fear feeds the very patterns you're trying to change. Shame drives them deeper into the unconscious, where they can operate with even less conscious oversight. Suppression creates internal pressure that eventually explodes outward in ways you cannot predict or control. The path I'm describing requires a completely different approach, one based on curious engagement, respectful acknowledgement, and skillful channeling rather than fearful avoidance. This shift in orientation alone begins to transform your relationship with these energies from adversarial to collaborative. When you can face the destroyer within yourself without flinching, you gain access to the discernment necessary to eliminate what truly needs to be removed from your life. When you can acknowledge the manipulator within yourself without shame, you develop the social intelligence to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics effectively. When you can embrace the rebel within yourself without guilt, you gain the courage to challenge systems and situations that need to be changed. This is not about becoming more destructive, manipulative, or rebellious in your external behavior. It's about becoming conscious of these capacities so you can use them strategically and appropriately rather than having them use you unconsciously and destructively. The second crucial understanding involves what I call archetypal recontextualization, changing the framework through which you relate to challenging aspects of your psyche. Most people operate from what we might call the moral model of psychology, where impulses and traits are categorized as inherently good or evil, acceptable or unacceptable. But this model creates enormous psychological distress because it requires you to constantly monitor and judge your natural responses rather than understanding their deeper purposes. The truth that will revolutionize your relationship with yourself is this: there are no inherently evil impulses or emotions, only energies that become destructive when unconscious, misdirected, or inappropriately expressed. Anger isn't evil, it's energy that alerts you to boundary violations and provides the force necessary to address them. Sexual desire isn't evil, it's life force energy that can be channeled into creativity, passion, and deep intimacy. The urge to dominate isn't evil, it's the drive to create order and direction when situations require leadership. The psychological mechanism behind this recontextualization involves what neuroscientists call cognitive reappraisal, consciously shifting the interpretive framework you use to understand your experiences. When you stop categorizing psychological energies as inherently good or bad and start evaluating them based on consciousness level and appropriateness of expression, you free enormous amounts of mental energy that were previously locked up in internal conflict. This shift requires rewiring some of the deepest programming most people carry about what it means to be a good person. You've been taught that good people don't have destructive impulses, don't feel intense anger, don't experience powerful desires for control or dominance. But observation of actual human beings, including the most admired and effective individuals throughout history, reveals that the opposite is true. The people who accomplish extraordinary things, who create lasting positive change, who demonstrate remarkable courage in difficult circumstances. These individuals have learned to consciously work with their full spectrum of human energies rather than limiting themselves to the narrow band society deems acceptable. They understand that trying to be good by eliminating aspects of yourself makes you weak, not virtuous. The mental blocks that prevent most people from making this shift are deeply embedded and culturally reinforced. The first is what I call spiritual perfectionism. The belief that psychological development means becoming an idealized version of human consciousness that never experiences difficult emotions or challenging impulses. This creates an impossible standard that generates constant self-criticism and prevents genuine self-acceptance. The second block is shadow phobia, terror of discovering that you're capable of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors you've judged as unacceptable. This fear keeps you trapped in a very small, safe zone of personality expression while cutting you off from tremendous sources of personal power and creativity. The third obstacle is integration resistance, the part of your psyche that has organized itself around being the good person or the enlightened individual and fears that acknowledging your darker aspects will threaten this identity. This resistance often manifests as intellectual understanding without emotional integration, or as temporary enthusiasm, followed by unconscious sabotage of your own progress. The practical mental shifts that enable successful integration begin with what I call archetypal curiosity, approaching the darker aspects of your psyche with the same fascination and respect you might bring to studying a powerful natural force like lightning or volcanic activity. These energies aren't personal failures or moral shortcomings, they're impersonal psychological forces that exist within every human being and can be channeled constructively or destructively, depending on the level of consciousness brought to them. The second shift involves energy neutrality, recognizing that psychological energies are like tools in a workshop. A hammer isn't good or evil, it's useful for certain applications and inappropriate for others. Your capacity for destruction isn't inherently problematic. It becomes problematic only when unconscious or misdirected. Your manipulative capabilities aren't shameful character flaws, they're social intelligence tools that can be used ethically or unethically, depending on your intentions and methods. The third transformation requires integration intention, shifting from the goal of eliminating aspects of yourself to the goal of conscious collaboration with all aspects of yourself. This means approaching your psychological development like a conductor working with a full orchestra rather than like a music teacher trying to silence half the instruments. Now let me share a specific technique that elite performers across multiple domains have used to integrate archetypal energies safely and effectively. This practice, which I call shadow sparring, has been validated by everyone from world-class athletes to innovative business leaders to master artists who needed to access their full creative range without being overwhelmed by psychological intensity. The brain science behind why this technique works relates to what researchers call controlled exposure therapy combined with cognitive load balancing. When you practice engaging with challenging psychological energies in a structured, time-limited context, you develop neural pathways that allow you to access these energies consciously while maintaining executive control. It's similar to how military training prepares soldiers to function effectively under extreme stress by practicing high-intensity scenarios in controlled environments until the nervous system learns to remain calm and strategic even when experiencing intense arousal. Elite performers understand something that most people never discover: the same psychological energies that can create destructive chaos when unconscious become sources of tremendous competitive advantage when consciously directed. The anger that could destroy relationships becomes fuel for breakthrough innovations. The manipulative intelligence that could damage trust becomes strategic thinking that anticipates and responds to complex social dynamics. The destructive impulses that could sabotage success become discernment that eliminates obstacles and inefficiencies. Here's how to implement shadow sparring effectively. Choose a 15-minute period when you won't be interrupted and create a psychological container by setting clear intentions about what you want to explore and accomplish. Begin by focusing on a specific archetypal energy that you typically suppress or fear. Let's say the inner destroyer that notices what needs to be eliminated from your life. Instead of immediately judging or suppressing awareness of this energy, spend 5 minutes consciously exploring it through visualization and emotional sensing. What does this part of you notice about your current life situation? What people, habits, commitments, or beliefs does it want to eliminate? What would your life look like if you honored its discernment about what's not serving you? Allow yourself to feel the power and clarity that comes from accessing this perspective without immediately acting on any impulses that arise. During the second 5-minute period, practice what I call conscious channeling, imagining how you could honor the essential message of this archetypal energy through constructive action. If your inner destroyer is alerting you to toxic relationships, what specific boundaries or communications could address this? If it's highlighting wasteful habits, what systems could you create to eliminate them? The key is translating the raw energy into strategic, intentional action rather than impulsive or reactive behavior. The final 5 minutes involve integration, anchoring, consciously appreciating the value this energy brings to your life, while setting clear intentions about how you want to work with it moving forward. Thank this aspect of yourself for its protective function and commit to consulting it regularly rather than suppressing it. This creates a collaborative relationship between your conscious mind and previously rejected psychological energies. The most common mistake people make with this technique is trying to rush the process or skipping the emotional sensing portion in favor of purely intellectual analysis. You cannot integrate energies you haven't actually felt and experienced. Another frequent error is practicing this technique only when you're already emotionally activated, which makes it difficult to maintain the objective awareness necessary for conscious integration. The optimal timing for shadow sparring is when you're emotionally neutral but curious, not when you're already overwhelmed by intensity, and not when you're completely disconnected from your emotional experience. Most people find that practicing this technique 3 to 4 times per week creates steady progress without overwhelming their capacity for integration. What makes this technique particularly powerful is its cumulative effect over time. Each session builds your familiarity with archetypal energies and confidence in your ability to work with them consciously. After several weeks of consistent practice, you'll notice that situations that previously triggered unconscious reactive patterns now automatically activate your conscious integration skills instead. Remember, the goal isn't to eliminate these energies or to indulge them compulsively. The goal is to develop such familiarity and skill with your complete psychological spectrum that you can access any energy you need for a given situation while maintaining ethical standards and strategic thinking. When you complete this integration process, you'll possess a level of psychological sovereignty that most people cannot even imagine. You'll no longer be at the mercy of unconscious patterns or external manipulation, because you'll understand the full range of human psychological dynamics from direct inner experience. This is true personal power, not the brittle control that comes from suppression, but the flexible strength that comes from conscious collaboration with all aspects of yourself. The systematic approach that creates consistent results in archetypal integration follows what I call the progressive exposure protocol, a step-by-step system that allows you to gradually build tolerance and skill with challenging psychological energies without becoming overwhelmed or acting destructively. This system works when others fail because it respects the natural learning curve required for psychological integration while providing concrete structure that prevents the chaos that often results from unguided shadow work. The technical mechanism behind this protocol involves what neuroscientists call graduated stress inoculation, the same principle used in successful addiction recovery, phobia treatment, and military training. By exposing yourself to carefully calibrated doses of psychological intensity within a supportive framework, you develop what researchers term distress tolerance, the ability to experience challenging emotions and impulses without being controlled by them. Here's the step-by-step process. Week 1 involves archetypal mapping, identifying which specific dark archetypes are most active and suppressed in your psyche. You'll spend 10 minutes each day simply noticing and cataloging when you experience judgmental thoughts about others, moments of irritation or anger, times when you want to manipulate or control situations, or instances when you feel destructive impulses. The goal is pure observation without action or judgment. Week 2 introduces conscious acknowledgement, explicitly recognizing these energies as valuable parts of your psychological makeup rather than character flaws to be eliminated. Each time you notice an archetypal energy arising, you practice saying internally, I notice my inner destroyer is alerting me to something that needs attention, or my inner manipulator is providing information about this social dynamic. This begins to transform your relationship with these energies from adversarial to collaborative. Week 3 focuses on energy translation, learning to interpret the essential message each archetypal energy is providing and considering how to honor that message through conscious action. If your inner destroyer is activated by a toxic work environment, what specific changes could address this concern? If your inner seducer is responding to feelings of disconnection in your relationship, what authentic intimacy building actions could meet this need? The key is finding constructive ways to honor archetypal wisdom rather than suppressing it or expressing it destructively. Week 4 emphasizes strategic implementation, actually taking the conscious actions you've identified while maintaining awareness of the archetypal energies that inform them. This might involve having difficult conversations, setting boundaries, ending toxic relationships, or pursuing creative projects that express previously suppressed aspects of yourself. The goal is to demonstrate to your unconscious mind that you can be trusted to act on archetypal guidance appropriately. The before and after transformation scenarios that result from this systematic approach are remarkable and consistent. Before integration, individuals typically experience what I call personality imprisonment. They feel trapped in narrow behavioral patterns that don't fully express their capabilities or meet their needs. They struggle with persistent anxiety, depression, or anger that seems to come from nowhere. They have difficulty setting boundaries, standing up for themselves, or pursuing ambitious goals because they lack access to the psychological energies necessary for these actions. After completing the integration process, the same individuals demonstrate what we might call archetypal fluency, the ability to consciously access whatever psychological energy a situation requires. They can be gentle when gentleness serves, fierce when fierceness is needed, strategic when complexity demands calculation, and spontaneous when creativity requires freedom from excessive planning. This flexibility makes them remarkably effective in personal relationships, professional endeavors, and creative pursuits. Perhaps most importantly, they develop what I call shadow immunity because they've integrated their own capacity for manipulation, destruction, and other challenging behaviors. They become very difficult to manipulate or exploit. They can recognize these dynamics in others immediately and respond appropriately because they understand the psychological mechanisms involved from direct inner experience. The sabotage patterns that derail most people's integration efforts typically emerge around week 3 or 4, when the system begins requiring actual behavioral changes rather than just internal awareness practices. The first pattern is spiritual bypassing, relapse, returning to previous strategies of trying to think your way out of difficult emotions rather than feeling and working with them directly. The second is perfectionism paralysis, becoming so concerned with implementing the techniques perfectly that you stop practicing them altogether. The third is integration overwhelm, trying to work with too many archetypal energies simultaneously instead of focusing on one or two at a time. The key to preventing these sabotage patterns is maintaining what I call experimental attitude, approaching the integration process as a fascinating psychological experiment rather than a test of your character or spiritual development. When you frame challenges as data collection opportunities rather than personal failures, you maintain the curiosity and persistence necessary for genuine transformation. Remember, this system isn't about becoming a different person, it's about becoming a more complete version of who you already are. Every human being contains the full spectrum of archetypal energies. The difference between psychological health and dysfunction lies in the level of consciousness and skill with which these energies are expressed. The fifth method for archetypal integration involves what I call embodied shadow work. engaging with dark archetypal energies through specific physical practices rather than limiting yourself to purely mental or emotional approaches. This technique is particularly powerful because psychological energies are not abstract concepts, they are lived experiences that manifest through your nervous system, posture, breathing patterns, and physical presence. The reason physical action is more powerful than mental work alone relates to what neuroscientists call embodied cognition, the understanding that your physical state directly influences your psychological state and vice versa. When you practice engaging with archetypal energies through deliberate physical actions, you create neural pathways that allow conscious access to these energies in real-world situations where mental techniques might not be sufficient. Elite performers across multiple domains have discovered that the most reliable way to integrate challenging psychological energies is through what I call archetypal specific physical exercises that allow you to experience and channel different archetypal energies safely. Dancers work with the inner wild one through expressive movement that would be marked inappropriate in social settings. Martial artists integrate the inner warrior through combat practices that develop controlled aggression. Business leaders access the inner tyrant through power posture practices that build commanding presence. Here are 3 different implementation options you can choose based on your temperament and circumstances. The first approach is archetypal athletics, using physical exercise as a laboratory for exploring different psychological. When you're lifting weights, practice accessing your inner destroyer by imagining you're eliminating weakness and limitation with each repetition. During cardiovascular exercise, experiment with channeling your inner wild one by allowing your breathing and movement to become more primal and less controlled. While practicing yoga or stretching, explore your inner seducer by moving with sensual awareness and appreciation for your body's capabilities. The second option is ceremonial practice, creating structured rituals that allow you to safely explore archetypal energies through symbolic action. This might involve writing letters to people who have hurt you and then burning them to engage your inner destroyer's need for elimination and transformation. Or it could include dancing alone to music that evokes different emotional states as a way of integrating your inner wild one. The key is creating clear containers with defined beginnings and endings that allow intense exploration without bleeding into your daily life inappropriately. The third approach is situational embodiment, consciously practicing archetypal expression in appropriate real-world contexts. This might mean deliberately accessing your inner tyrant when leading meetings or difficult conversations, channeling your inner trickster when navigating complex social dynamics, or engaging your inner destroyer when eliminating clutter from your home or inefficiencies from your work processes. Historical and cultural validation for these practices can be found in virtually every wisdom tradition throughout human history. Ancient Greek theater allowed audiences to experience the full spectrum of human emotions and behaviors through dramatic performance. Indigenous cultures worldwide have traditionally used dance, ritual, and ceremony to help individuals integrate challenging psychological energies in community contexts. Eastern martial arts were specifically designed to help practitioners develop conscious relationship with aggressive and destructive capabilities while maintaining ethical standards and emotional balance. The reason these practices have been consistent across cultures and time periods is that they address a fundamental aspect of human psychology: the need to consciously engage with the full spectrum of archetypal energies, rather than rejecting portions of your psychological makeup. When societies fail to provide appropriate outlets for these energies, they manifest unconsciously through war, crime, addiction, and other destructive patterns. What makes physical practice particularly effective for integration is that it bypasses the intellectual defenses that often prevent genuine psychological change. Your mind can rationalize and resist new concepts almost indefinitely, but your body responds immediately to direct experience. When you physically practice commanding presence, your nervous system learns what authentic power feels like. When you embody fierce boundaries through movement, your body develops muscle memory for self-protection that activates automatically when needed. The timing and frequency recommendations that optimize results vary based on the intensity of your chosen practice and your current level of psychological integration. For most people, practicing archetypal embodiment 2 to 4 times per week for 20 to 30 minutes creates steady progress without overwhelming their capacity for integration. More frequent practice can be beneficial if you're working with a qualified guide or have extensive experience with psychological integration work. The key is consistency rather than intensity. Regular moderate practice creates more sustainable transformation than sporadic intensive efforts. This is because archetypal integration involves developing new neural pathways and behavioral patterns, which requires repetition over time rather than dramatic single experiences. What makes this approach particularly valuable is how physical practice creates momentum that carries over into other areas of your life. When you physically practiced accessing your inner warrior through martial arts or assertive movement, you naturally carry that energy into situations where you need to defend your boundaries. When you've embodied your inner wild one through expressive dance or running, you have easier access to spontaneity and creativity in your work and relationships. The momentum building aspect of physical archetypal work relates to what psychologists call self-efficacy, confidence in your ability to handle challenging situations effectively. Each time you successfully practice engaging with archetypal energies through physical action, you build evidence that you can work with these forces consciously rather than being overwhelmed by them. This creates a positive feedback loop where success builds confidence, which enables greater willingness to explore, which leads to deeper integration and more success. Remember, the goal of these physical practices isn't to become more physically aggressive, sexually inappropriate, or domineeringly controlling in your daily interactions. The goal is to develop such familiarity and comfort with these energies that you can access them strategically when appropriate situations require their particular gifts while maintaining full conscious control over their expression. When you complete this embodied integration process, you'll discover a level of presence and authentic power that others can sense immediately. People will respond to you differently because you'll be emanating the confidence that comes from knowing you can handle whatever situations arise. This isn't fake confidence based on denial of your vulnerabilities. It's genuine strength based on conscious relationship with your complete psychological spectrum. the psychology of implementation that determines whether your archetypal integration efforts create lasting transformation, involves understanding and working with what I call identity transition dynamics, the psychological processes that occur when you shift from a fragmented self to an integrated one. Most people approach personal development as if they're adding new skill to their existing personality structure, when what's actually required is a fundamental reorganization of how you understand yourself and your capabilities. The crucial shift from victim mentality to creator mentality begins with recognizing that your current psychological patterns, including the suppression of archetypal energies, are not happening to you. They are choices you are making based on conditioning and past experiences. This recognition is initially uncomfortable because it requires acknowledging your responsibility for patterns you may have blamed on external circumstances, but it is also tremendously empowering because it reveals your capacity to make different choices. When you truly understand that your personality is not a fixed structure, but rather a dynamic system that responds to conscious intention and practice, you begin to relate to psychological development as a creative act rather than a corrective process. Instead of trying to fix what's wrong with you, you begin experimenting with what's possible for you. This shift in orientation alone creates dramatically different results because it changes your relationship with the integration process from dutiful compliance to enthusiastic exploration. The language patterns that build certainty about your transformation involve shifting from if to when constructions in both your internal dialogue and external communications. Instead of saying, if I can learn to integrate my shadow, you begin saying, when I complete my shadow integration. Instead of, if this works for me, you practice when this transformation occurs. This isn't positive thinking or denial of challenges, it's presupposition embedding that primes your unconscious mind for success rather than failure. The reason previous attempts at psychological change may have failed relates to what we might call partial commitment syndrome, approaching personal development with one foot in the transformation and one foot in the familiar patterns. Your unconscious mind is remarkably sensitive to ambivalence, and it will consistently sabotage efforts that it perceives as tentative or half-hearted. Genuine transformation requires what I call point of no return commitment, deciding that you are going to become a psychologically integrated person regardless of how long it takes or what challenges arise. This level of commitment doesn't mean forcing yourself through practices that don't resonate or ignoring your genuine concerns about the process. It means recognizing that the cost of remaining psychologically fragmented, the energy drain, the missed opportunities, the persistent dissatisfaction, the vulnerability to manipulation is greater than the effort required to complete the integration process. When you make this commitment, you automatically begin separating from your old identity as someone who has problems with anger, struggles with assertiveness, or can't handle conflict. These self-definitions become incompatible with your new identity as someone who is learning to work consciously with all aspects of their psychological makeup. This identity shift creates tremendous momentum because it aligns your self-concept with your development goals rather than working against them. The urgency that facilitates successful implementation comes not from external pressure but from genuine recognition of what becomes possible when you complete this work. When you truly understand that archetypal integration gives you access to psychological resources that most people never develop, the ability to command respect naturally, to create and eliminate situations strategically, to maintain emotional equilibrium under pressure, to express creativity without self-censorship, you naturally want to accelerate your progress rather than procrastinate. This urgency is particularly important because archetypal energies respond to decisiveness and commitment in ways that tentative approaches cannot access. Your inner warrior emerges when you demonstrate courage through action, not when you think about being courageous. Your inner sovereign activates when you take responsibility for creating the life you want, not when you analyze why you feel powerless. Your inner wild one reveals itself when you risk authentic expression, not when you intellectually understand the importance of spontaneity. The practical implementation that ensures lasting results involves what I call daily integration practice, spending 15 to 20 minutes each day consciously working with archetypal energies through the methods we've discussed. This might include 5 minutes of shadow sparring with a specific archetype, 10 minutes of embodied practice through movement or exercise, and 5 minutes of conscious action planning based on archetypal guidance you've received. The key is making this practice non-negotiable in the same way you might treat physical exercise or professional responsibilities. Your psychological development requires the same consistency and prioritization as any other significant goal, and it delivers results proportional to the commitment you bring to it. When you approach archetypal integration with this level of commitment and urgency, you begin experiencing what I call accelerated identity evolution, rapid positive changes in your self-concept, capabilities, and life circumstances that compound exponentially over time. Instead of struggling for years with the same psychological patterns, you begin demonstrating new capacities within weeks and experiencing fundamental shifts within months. This is not magic or wishful thinking. It's the natural result of working with your psychological system in the way it was designed to function. When you stop fighting against aspects of yourself and start collaborating with them consciously, you access levels of energy, creativity, and effectiveness that were always available but blocked by internal conflict. What we've explored today brings us full circle to the fundamental truth I shared at the beginning. The dark archetypes within you are not enemies to be conquered, but allies to be integrated. When you stop trying to eliminate aspects of your psychological makeup and start learning to work with them consciously, you access levels of power, creativity, and authentic presence that transform every area of your life. The conventional wisdom that taught you to fear and suppress these energies has kept you trapped in a fraction of your true potential. But now you know better. You understand that psychological wholeness requires embracing your complete archetypal spectrum, not just the parts that society finds comfortable or convenient. You are not here to be a sanitized, predictable version of human consciousness. You are here to be a fully actualized, authentically powerful individual who can navigate life's complexities with skill, courage, and wisdom. This requires having access to the full range of human psychological energies, including those that conventional thinking labels as dark or dangerous. The choice before you now is simple but not easy. You can continue operating from the limited range of personality expression that has brought you to this point, or you can commit to developing the psychological sovereignty that comes from conscious relationship with all aspects of yourself. You can remain vulnerable to manipulation and exploitation because you don't understand these dynamics from inner experience, or you can develop the shadow immunity that makes you virtually impossible to manipulate or control. I want you to take action on this material immediately, while the energy of possibility is still alive in your system. Choose one of the 5 methods we've discussed and practice it for the next 7 days. Notice how different you feel when you're not at war with aspects of yourself. Pay attention to how others respond to the increased authenticity and power that emerges when you stop suppressing your psychological energies. Share your experiences in the comments below, particularly any resistance you encounter or breakthroughs you experience. Your journey toward integration not only transforms your own life, but contributes to the collective healing of a culture that has been damaged by archetypal fragmentation for far too long. The time for pretending you're less complex, less powerful, and less capable than you actually are is over. The world needs individuals who have completed their psychological integration work, people who can handle complexity, navigate challenging situations, and demonstrate authentic leadership because they are no longer afraid of their own psychological depths. You have everything you need to begin this transformation right now. The only question is whether you choose the path of continued fragmentation or the path of conscious integration. Choose wisely, choose decisively, and choose today. Your future self is waiting for you to become everything you were meant to be.